Our first speaker for the afternoon is the president of PsychVantage LLC, Alan Morris. Now we're giving you a different perspective of this workplace bullying, harassment, discrimination issue from a psychologist's point of view. So Alan is an accomplished clinical and consulting psychologist. He's board-certified coach with more than 25 years of experience providing behavioral health services, crisis management, and specialized consultation for a variety of corporations, management groups, and individual clients. Alan is uniquely qualified to blend exceptional consultation and coaching skills with a keen understanding of organizational dynamics to promote employee health and wellness, support executive and management development, and maximize personal and professional performance. May I present Alan Morris.
Geez, I had a hard time recognizing that person. I forgot that's something I guess that came from LinkedIn. Well, thank you again for attending. Before we get started, I always like to get a little sense of knowing my audience. So I have a good sense of who some of the presenters that I've already had a chance to meet, but this student body's been pretty quiet here lately, so I'm really curious. And be honest, how many people would be here today if you were not getting credit? You don't have to answer that, just kidding, just kidding. Okay, I always start with that because I want to know, and here's my reason for that, because it always seems that I'm either speaking first thing in the morning, last thing in the afternoon, or in the 5-hour energy 2:30 or 1:30 to 2:30 period where all you guys want to do is take a nap, like I do. So my job is to keep myself awake, and hopefully it's going to keep you guys awake. But before I get started, I also want to know, I'm a psychologist, so don't think, spit it out. What's the first word that comes to mind when somebody says psychologist?
Drink. Couch.
Yeah, okay. And mind you, what's that got to do with bullying? We don't know. We haven't got a clue. Get it? Okay, that's the traditional way of looking at things. But here's what I'm going to suggest, which is why I think this is I put it up there specifically, a perspective. Don't have answers. Hopefully I'm going to raise lots of questions and give you some ideas about what strategies we might be able to implement, because everybody involved, victim, perpetrator, bystanders, as we've all heard about, what do they have in common? They're human. What do all humans have? They think, they feel, and they behave. Now, I didn't put it up there, but my tagline for PsychVantage, which by the way I came up with after months of agony, I was trying to put together what's the advantage of having a psychologist and using a psychologist. The answer I came up with is my tagline, which says, insight into exceptional. Meaning we take insight and turn it into exceptional performance, but insight becomes performance. We provide insight into human behavior, okay? Now that doesn't mean that I psychoanalyze everybody here, by the way you're sitting, for instance, by the way you're not making eye contact. Don't worry about that. But just letting you know, it's all possible. The bottom line though is that, see, there are psychological processes, strategies, tools, and resources that I think really have some application for what we're talking about here. So, what I'm going to try to do, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to how I got involved in this. I started out as, well, my 5th major was psychology. Anybody here a psych major? No.
I was.
Well, I was.
I
was. Yeah, see, that's, okay, so I started out as my 5th major, and I ended up getting into the clinical component. And I started off as a neuropsychologist in Chicago, ABD, which means audit dissertation, and ended up moving to San Diego, where I got and finished my degree in existential psychotherapy. So I pretty much covered the entire gauntlet. What I also did was I started working with the San Diego Police Department, their fire departments. I trained SWAT members. I became a specialist in workplace violence. I was on site for the school shootings at Santana and Granite Hills. I just was here after, you know the one about Mercy Fitzgerald, they just had a shooting in outside of Philadelphia. I was a director of an employee assistance program where we provided the critical incident services. So, I see the real negative outcomes of bullying. It's on a continuum, and I'm going to reference Catherine here, because I think it's important to recognize that this is all wrapped up into aggression, human emotion, by the way, emotions, key word. We are supposedly emotional experts. So when I talk about emotions, I'm talking, keeping it simple, 3 of them rhyme: mad, glad, sad, afraid. Okay? There may be more. Some people say guilt, some people say shame. I stick to the 4 basics. Test question. Anger. Let's take anger, because that usually can be involved with bullying. Is anger a positive or negative emotion? First answer is?
It
I
depends.
love it. You're all future FBI people, because that's the answer they give to everything. It doesn't depend on the emotion, it depends on what? What you do with the... Got it. You guys are already ahead of the game. So everybody says, oh, anger's horrible. Well, and then I use the example, if I smoked for 20 years, and I get so pissed off at myself, I throw all my cigs away and I'm done. Is anger a positive or negative emotion? Trick question. It's still neutral. It's neither. It's the behavior that I did. Okay? So you see there's a link. Thoughts, feelings, behavior. Okay, we got that. That was Psych 101. Now we can move on. All right, here we go. I think bullying, and part of its problem, is it has an identity problem. Okay? Read just some of these. Abuse, abusiveness, aggression, bullying, mobbing, counterproductive work, yada, yada, yada. I don't read my slides because I just made them up last night, so I don't even know what's there.
Before or after one?
After one. But look at all this. Now, if you were to read these cold, not know what's going on and what the topic is, what's the first emotional response you have?
Fatigue.
That's not an emotion. Mad, glad, sad, or afraid? Afraid, fear.
Afraid.
Got it, okay? Some people anger, depends on which side of the whole process. What was your experience with these terms, okay? So I think it's really important that one of the big problems is, if you're gonna have a policy, and we'll get to this, you have to define the behavior. Well, good luck. Where do you wanna start? Pick one. All right, psychological aggression. Yeah, that works, but is that really bullying? We don't know. Again, the FBI answered, it depends. So I think that's really kind of important, and I want to talk about this because I had to put in a caveat, a caution about workplace violence. Because there's a difference. And thanks to Catherine Mattice, she's given us a bit of a continuum. I don't want to go into it, read the book. It's a really good book in terms of addressing this. You can just pay me later. We started with incivility. Now that was what they were talking about this morning, where it's just rude. I'm having a bad day, and I can't, I can't kick the cat, so I'll yell at my employee. Okay? That's just rare. It's not perpetuated. Can be. We've all had bad days. Okay? Then you get to emotional bullying. See, then there's that key word again. That emotions, man. There's something about that word that sticks here. Predatory bullying, mobbing, and violence. I think people need to recognize that my responsibility as somebody who has been on cases where there has been workplace violence and actually working as an assessor of workplace violence, I have to tell people that when in doubt, assume the worst. Workplace violence is a threat, and as I think Donna's statistics showed, it's significant. We have had more and more people resolving their conflicts by pulling out weapons. So if you have any questions, if there's any sense of danger, trust it, get an assessment, do what you need to do. Because, okay, I want you all to be amateur clinicians here, because in the next slide I want you to tell me, is this possible bullying or possible workplace violence, okay? Good, good. Don't call HR first. They may want to get involved later, but call 911. Okay, so that's my caution, that's my responsibility from my ethical background, that I have to say, be careful, be aware, there can be some safety concerns, and whenever possible, always err on the side of caution. Okay? Now, here's where we're going to get into some contradictions, and I think it's all been documented, and I have 106 slides to get through, so I'm going to have to do it, just kidding. All right, workplace bullying contradiction. We all know why it's so serious, because there are negative results, consequences, outcomes, right? Health problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, illness, the emotional damage, Technically, it's job security in my profession for people having all these things, but I would rather not see them. Remember, I'm talking about prevention and proactive intervention. Employee engagement, we all talk about that. Presenteeism, absenteeism. We all know the negatives about what is a result of bully behavior, correct? Let's not talk, Donna mentioned some of them. Organizational cost, high turnover, 1.5 times the cost to replace me of my salary. Absenteeism, damaged corporate reputation. How many people can have a very positive, warm, fuzzy feeling when I mention the word Enron? How long ago was that?
Long time.
Years. It sticks. Maya Angelou had a wonderful statement, the poet. She said, I may not remember what you did, but I will never forget how you made me feel. Don't ever forget that. Damaged corporate reputation, legal costs. When I was the director of an employee assistance program, we had 14 major law firms as clients. Now, mind you, there's a real contradiction here because lawyers are some of the worst bulliers. However, they also represent people who have been bullied. Go figure. Contradictions. Okay, now, here's what happens. We all know the bad stuff that happens when there's a bullying situation. Correct? Made my case. It's all been made this morning and will be continued to be made. Here's the problem. There are inconsistencies in the workplace responses to workplace bullying. State by state, municipality by municipality, university to university, union to union. You heard like Sue was talking about one union does this, one union does that. The existing organizational conduct policies, they don't really clearly define it. Why? Because remember those 36 ones that I had to pick out from the first slide there? And even if we have a policy, look at this. 53% of employers did nothing. And according to Gary Namey, 71% retaliate against the person bringing the complaint. So I'm being a relatively logical, rational thinking person. Do you really think I'm going to put my ass out on the line? Probably not. So here's the contradiction. We all know what's wrong and what's bad, but the problem is we seem to get kind of hung up and we start tripping over ourselves as to what we want to do about it. Anybody here in the HR track? Okay. So we're going to get to your situation because you are really between the rock and the hard place. And it gets really interesting when you start looking at it. Because, why? Look how many hats you have to wear. You have all these roles. You're supposed to be the strategic partner, which translates into, I have to be in favor of what management tells me I need to be in favor of. I have to support the company mission, the vision, and all the corporate things that hang on the wall in the lobby. Okay? But I also have to be the administrative expert, which means I don't think you have time off. You used your sick leave last week, and we need to get your contract changed because the 1% pay raise went in, and et cetera, et cetera. Administrative, by the way, I talked to most HR people from the Employee Assistance Program, and I will say I've worked with hundreds of them, and not one of them really speaks highly of the administrative duties, which is really interesting. But that's another story. So now we get to employee champion. You are supposed to be working to bring the best out of your employees and the best to your employees. This might be a contradiction here, as well as being responsible for change. Wow, did you guys know all this? And you're going to get so well paid for it, but that's another story. My point here is that you're going to get some conflicts potentially between this one, what business strategy is, as well as being the employee champion. Okay? So, let's compound it. Complex phenomena, we all know that. But I want to be a little more specific. There are psychological, social, political, and I just named a few elements. This is a key one right here. Bullying itself somehow gets associated with an individual issue, an individual problem, an individual person. It may be cultural, because in America, in the United States of America, we are always bringing up by the bootstraps, we have to fight for whatever we got, et cetera, win, lose, us, them. But if you figure that if we've taken care of the individual, then we've taken care of the problem. I don't think that's true anymore, and I'll try to make my case. The other bottom one there is a survey identified lack of leadership. Okay? One of the things we try to do is We know the negative office corporate environments that associate with bullying. What psychology's been trying to do from the corporate and consulting psychology perspective is to find out what organizations don't have a bullying problem and what makes them unique. And one of the things that they found, leadership. Leadership is truly one of the biggest factors for or against bullying.
Yes.
In situations where you have strong leadership, people willing to take chances, willing to take the risk to do the right thing, you don't have so much bullying, nor do you have so much harassment, nor do you have so much turnover, nor do you have any of those other things that have been negatively associated with the groups that do have bullying. So, a couple things. Psychological perspective, emotions, cognitions, behaviors, covered a couple things. So, take a break. No, don't leave, just take a mental break. Questions, comments, complaints, moans, and groans. Thoughts so far? I'm not done, but I just want to check in. Is anybody asleep here? Raise your hand. Okay. Thoughts?
I don't dispute your description of HR overall, but in my particular organization, HR was totally under the thumb of management.
Second. Oh, and there are gradations along that entire continuum. And imagine being a female HR representative, or professional, or director in a male-dominated field, such as the medical, such as legal. Okay? Think about it. Oh, it's hot up here. Jeez. Anyway.
Alan, I would also just to add one thing, you bring up NAMI, and there are always issues with NAMI, but just to sort of lend some support to that, during the strategic task force with the EEOC, we had experts in talking about reporting of gender-based and other forms of class-based harassment. And, you know, the experts that we had during the open meeting all came to sort of the same conclusion. The person who actually reports the harassment is irrational because their chances of getting help by reporting to HR are much slimmer, and the help they might get is much less than the potential harm.
Exactly.
So,
It's catch-22.
it's not
I
just naming
disagree
names.
with that
Well-
because HR is my target market, and I wouldn't have a consulting business if HR had these responses that, and you go online and everything's like, HR is against you, don't you dare go to them. That's not my experience. I speak to
Okay,
1,200
all right, hang on, I'm gonna interrupt you for a second. I get it,
professionals.
You're already in the field.
I'm fighting for HR.
I know, I need a budding HR expert. Were you in HR? Yeah, okay. I'm reporting to you, you're the director of HR, I'm reporting to you, Catherine is bullying me by the minute. She's made my life a pure living hell here. What are you gonna do about it?
I mean, first and foremost, I guess we try to solve it in-house.
I don't know, what does that mean? How do you solve it in-house?
I mean, like, it depends on how serious the problem is. I mean, if it's verbal and stuff, you can try to separate the situation, kind of do some job.
I refuse to work with her. I can't work with her anymore. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna be on sick leave for the next 3 months.
Based on what?
The bullying, my stomach, my headache, I can't concentrate, I've lost my focus, I can't remember things.
We don't
FMLA, stress leave.
FMLA, stress leave.
Yeah, unpaid.
We don't have a policy for it, sorry.
Okay.
Is it
Well,
based on a protected class?
but now, first of all, now that I'm picking on you, right, hang on. How does that make you feel? It's like, right? Got it. And you're not even in the field yet.
Nowhere to go, yeah.
Okay, so now's the time to rethink it. No, just kidding. Just kidding. You get my point though, because see, when you come back, this is what happens, and I'll tell you the next step for that. We used to do what we call supervisor referrals. I was a counselor, I'm not a clinician because I can't do it under the APA, but I would talk on the phone with people that had been referred for their bullying type behavior. And what would happen? Or a threat of violence, for instance, but let's stick to bullying. HR would call me because they don't want anything to do with it, and they'd say, well, you're the clinician, is this guy gonna bully again? And I'm 300 miles away, if not more. So my response to them is, there are only 3 people that know that. God, and he or she is probably busy.
Right.
Freud, he's dead. And the person who may or may not bully.
Yeah.
Do you see my problem? So I can't make that decision. But see, what HR is getting stuck doing is how do you predict future behavior?
can't.
Well, you can take insight, you can take information, but ultimately somebody has to stand up and guess what? They have to lead. They have to make the decision. So as future HR executives and directors, you're going to be in this position, and we'll talk about how we can assist you. Don't worry, I didn't leave that part out, because I really think you're going to need, there are some resources out there that may be underutilized. Okay? Which is a nice little segue into my next slide, which is, so what do we do about this, and where do we go from here?
Are there any psychological studies about whether bullying tends to be isolated incidents versus repetitive behavior?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what, this was one of my pet peeves, and I'm not the person to talk about the research, because then I'll just, we'll be here all afternoon. But the bottom line is, there was somebody, I can't remember who it was, that one of their stipulations and criterion for a bullying definition was at least 6 months of perpetuated bullying.
That's pretty standard. That's pretty standard.
6 months.
Yeah.
Now, wait a second. Now, I rolled my eyes when you asked that question.
Yeah, it's acceptable.
Is that bullying or not?
No.
Based on what?
It depends.
It depends, but bullying, rolling your eyes is considered a definition of bullying. Do you see the
It's part
issue?
of a pattern.
All right, but see, this is what we're gonna have to clarify. Antonio, you had a question?
My intent was to remain silent throughout the
But you don't have to.
You guys finish good stuff.
Yeah,
We're giving you.
I think in going back to what we were just talking about, I think we're leaving out an important component when in reporting to HR, especially in reporting to HR in regards to upper management, that where the upper management individuals are the perpetrators of the abuse, and
They are the perpetrators.
right.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in those cases, the relationships between that upper management individual and HR are in place. And so when you do arrive to HR with your complaint, in a lot of cases you're already labeled before you get there. So
Before you're walking down the hall.
which gives you a totally different outcome that we just created with our new HR person back here. And then there's the question of, okay, who is going to be sacrificed? This person that's at this level in the job, or this individual down here that's making the complaint. So,
And let me complicate things, because I'll talk about it a little later.
Okay.
What happens if that major executive who is bullying the crap out of people happens to be your top producer?
Yeah, then we
Yep.
cover it.
How about, I work with a group of surgeons, better known as scalpel throwers, and they're in a medical center. They're brilliant. They're absolutely wonderful surgeons. They bring in multi-millions of dollars, but they work with people who are asleep, so they bully the people that are working in the OR.
Yeah.
Okay?
Perfect.
So now, this person brings in $7.5 million in 2 quarters. 2 quarters. Okay? He's bullying, he's yelling, he's screaming, he's cursing, he's calling everybody the worst possible harassment, yes. And so what did HR do? Nothing. What had happened the second time? Nothing. What happened when there was a lawsuit filed? They did a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see my point. Canary in the coal mine, I said that this morning. A lot of times you need to really know what you're dealing with so that you catch it earlier. In my critical incident work, the best crisis I had ever worked on is one that did not take place. Okay? That's where the proactive prevention comes in. So you need to have a working familiarity with some of these concepts so that you can say, if it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, it's a bullying duck. I mean, my point is, and I think Antonio's point is absolutely, and we're going to get into that because here's what's going to happen. So remember now, I'm giving this out, I'm not quite sure it's the only way to go. In fact, I know it's not the only way to go, but it is perhaps a different direction which we might want to look at. We need all of the help we can get. We need access to all the resources we can find. And I think from a positive perspective, what I came up with, and I didn't realize it until I wrote this down, but I should copyright this. I have a proactive logic process. Okay, and what is that? The L stands for leading, O for organizational, G for group, I for individual, and Chi for change. I love you change that. C for change. So when you put that all together, it's leading organizational, group, and individual change. That's what we're going to be focusing on, because ultimately, you are all hoping to do what to a bullying culture? Change it. Exactly. Now, there are 2 things, and this is where I think our response to bullying to date has somewhat fallen short. We have two things we can do. In the shortened book of Dr. Morse's chapters on life, I have only 2 pages. One page says, change the situation. The other page says, change the way you allow the situation to affect you. Too many times and too often, we only look at page 2. The person leaves, the person commits suicide, the person gets another job, whatever. It's always trying to change that as opposed to changing the situation. Hopefully, I'm going to give you a couple ideas. Not a technique, not something that's foolproof. It has been associated with success, but I think we need to look at some of these from an emotional intelligence perspective. Okay? Daniel Goleman, 1995, wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence. It's basically talking about there is an IQ, which is your intellect, and there is your EQ, which is your emotional quotient. What he's saying is that because emotions are so key, they play such a large part in a workplace, people that are in a positive emotional environment show all of these. Increased productivity, they retain their talent, there's a higher morale, the commitment to the company, whatever you want to call it. And who really motivates this? Who is the catalyst, or who are the catalysts for this type of emotional environment? Your leaders. So one of the things that you might want to look at, and which is why I think Catherine's doing, when you're looking at getting an impact made, you start maybe with the leadership, because they have some of the control, they have some of the ways of managing meaning, which is what we call the way that they kind of influence the culture and the tone and the tenor in the workplace. By doing what? By modeling effective emotional reactions. Okay. Self-disclosure. I am absolutely enraged right now. I'm pissed off, I'm angry, because it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I am moving tomorrow, and I'm not packed, and I'm sitting there on this beautiful, gorgeous fall afternoon in a hot, stuffy, closed room. You guys agree with that? Am I?
No.
Why? How do you know?
Your action. I don't perceive that you're upset because you don't show it.
I'm not behaving that way. And I will never tell you if I did feel that way, which I don't, by the way. But you said the key word. What's your name?
Perceive. Sabrina.
Sabrina, you said the key word, perceive. Perceptions. Okay, we'll get to that because that is a big part of this whole idea in terms of one of the interventions that I really can look at and take a piece of. Perception is key. Okay, moving on. Now, let's go to this emotional intelligence thing because I think it's really important. Here's your crash course. There's no credit and there's no quiz. Some individuals, and we all know who they are, they're absolutely brilliant. Their IQ's off the scores, their scores are off the charts. They're really, really smart. But they are socially inept. They are the nerds of the nerds. Okay? And these folks, they do not manage life's challenges as well as some people with high IQ, which you will see. 90% of high performers, if measured by work productivity, all the good things that you measure when you're in the workplace, high in IQ, but only 20% of the low performers also have high IQs. EQs, I'm sorry. I always get them mixed up too. Here's a key one. You want to make another $29,000 a year? Raise your intelligence quotient, as in your emotional intelligence quotient. Okay, that's from Daniel Goleman. They've done some research out of the Hay Group and by the way, they are starting this at the kindergarten to 12, inducing this type of emotional awareness. It's critical for career success. It has been called, I'm not saying I'm going to buy it, a couple studies disputed, the single predictor of workplace performance and leadership excellence. So what do we know about emotional intelligence? Well, there are exceptions to it. Meaning that just because you're high in IQ but low in EQ doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be as successful. 20% IQ. But your ultimate niche in society, non-IQ. Social class, luck, rich parents, right professors, whatever the case would be. Which school did I go to? All those things. I mean, that's something we haven't really not that much. That's emotional intelligence doesn't really address that. It's no guarantee. But, and this is the part I love, there are many really, really smart people out there that do incredibly dumb things.
It's my life.
You want proof? There you go. Ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my heavens.
Maybe he can fly.
Okay. Notice?
Oh my gosh.
Okay, well, no, wait, that's not, no, it gets better. How about this one?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Show me he lived.
From a Freudian standpoint, we should take that one off the video.
Ouch.
There's a chainsaw being started with the blade between his legs, for those of you that can't see it. And by the way, speaking of chainsaws, just so you think that I'm making this up, in my chainsaw manual, there is an actual picture of a guy sitting on the end of a branch. Here's the tree, and he's cutting off the branch here. Why would you need the picture of that? Because apparently, but now here's my favorite. You ready? I love this
I
one.
want to see it.
Here's my personal favorite. Now,
Oh
just take a
my
look
God.
at this.
wow.
This are two flip-flops with an electrical outlet powering the boombox in what?
I'm getting it.
Well, now what is the one thing from a substance abuse association we might want to be looking at?
Contributing factor, right?
Well, no, wait, and not, that is not all in jest, because if you think about it, when do you see bouncers? When do fights take place? There's just a case now that they're talking about in Philadelphia, the Eagles-Giants game last Monday.
Oh, yeah.
There's a fist fight that took place.
Yeah.
Why? Because alcohol and drugs and substances reduce your inhibitions, which means your natural inhibition against violence is somewhat lowered. So that's why you're somewhat associated with it. Now, I'm not saying, you know, hi, this is Bud's stupidity. This is Coors, I'm a dummy. I mean, it doesn't always happen, and I don't want to be, it's not saying that anybody shouldn't be drinking, but I just think when you start looking at people that are probably relatively intelligent, who would come up with that?
What is going on the rubber here? But
That's how they tie the wire.
yeah, but what, is that a piece of wood?
Yes.
Or is that wood? Is that what that is?
That's the wood in case it falls in.
So it's going to carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, you get my point, all right?
Yeah.
So moving on, I'm gonna give you here's in a nutshell, in a real simple way of looking at it. Here's emotional intelligence from a leader's personal competency perspective. The first thing you're going to be able to do, hopefully, is understand your own emotions, okay? You have to know what your emotions are. You have to be able to read what's going on with you. So when somebody says, how do you feel? You can't say just fine. I mean, you can. It's social convention and social conversation. But as a leader, you need to know who's pissing you off, who's making you feel better, who's depressing the hell out of you. You have to have an understanding of what your own emotional activity is. Okay? Does that make sense? Know your own emotions because you're going to know your own strengths and limitations. Right now, without even having a show of hands, I will be guaranteeing you that there are some people, students included, when you see somebody coming, your stomach starts churning. Correct? Correct. I won't ask whose spouse or whoever else is involved, but that's another story. Self-management. That means you not only know what your emotions are, you manage them. Remember, I'm managing my rage in my heart right now very well because I'm not looking like I'm really pissed off. Okay? Control, transparency, trustworthiness, flexibility. As a therapist, I learned very early, with some difficulty, that when I listen to people's stories, if I responded out here the way that I was responded in here, I don't really think I'd have been a very good therapist. Because a lot of people come to therapy because that's exactly the response they're getting from other people, and they don't feel safe enough to raise those issues with me. So I learned I don't know which came first. Whether I was a good therapist because I was born to be good. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. But this is self-management. Okay, now, so you got the personal emotional intelligence. Now we're going to look at social. This is key because each incident in a workplace, bullying, aggression, whatever you want to call it, it's an interaction. You are socially interacting with somebody or something else. Empathy, that is a key component. Who here would like to be bullied?
Bullied.
Yeah, who wants to be bullied here? Anybody looking forward to it? I could ask that question to 100 people and get 101 people saying, no, I don't want to be bullied. But what about the bully? If you ask them, do they want to be bullied, what are they going to say?
No.
And yet they still bully. Why? Because they're not getting the feedback, their perceptions, they're not accurate. They don't know what the other person feels like because they have a lack of empathy. How many people here are really are good drivers? Most people. Okay? How many people think the rest of the people out there are real idiots? Okay, do the math, folks. It doesn't add up. Okay? So my point is, you have to recognize that empathy, being able to sense somebody else's response to you and their response to other people is going to be huge. Because if you think about it, nobody wants to be bullied. So why is it that people bully? Well, that's another whole presentation. But ultimately, the social awareness is only what's going on out there, what's the tone of the workers I'm working with, my group, whatever it may be, and then I can start to look at how I want to manage that. I can motivate, hopefully positively. I can have a positive influence. Conflict resolution does not necessarily mean you win, I lose. I win, you lose. There is such a thing as collaborative, constructive, whatever you want to call it, which is down here cooperation, collaboration. And the only way you can do that is if both people feel that I'm getting something, but I'm willing to give up something to you. Why? Because they're taking into consideration your opponent's, quote unquote, feelings, thoughts, whatever the case may be. So it's give and take, okay? So, just a real summary here. Self-awareness. That's the part where you know what your emotions are. They allow empathy, they relationship management. The more I know about my own emotions, the more I can help manage other people's. Now this is key. Remember those people that were showing up to work but they were too absent to really be working? It's called presenteeism. They show up, collect the paycheck, go home. That's burnout, stress, all the things that go with it. It has been shown that burnout, Maslow's time, it goes down when people feel they're working in a positive, emotional environment. Okay? Now, how do we create that emotional environment? Well, connecting with others. If I personally hate the people I'm working with, how happy of an employee am I going to be? Okay? And how happy am I going to make everybody else knowing that they're miserable working with me? Reduces conflict. So going back to this, remember we said leadership was a key component? Empathy. Regarding the employees' support of the organizational values and mission. So all of a sudden that statement that's on the lobby wall now starts to make sense. If you want to measure engagement, ask people what the company management is and what they're doing on a daily basis to support it. Get an idea, see what happens. Okay, now, let's go to the O. So leading to organizational change, what is it that you can do? Now this is just a surface swipe, it's a drive-by. Okay? And I'm not sure what that I stands for, but it should be in the workplace. Raise awareness. That's key. You said it best. What is it? How do you start? Where do you go? How do you assess? What's really going on? Is it bullying behavior? Is it mobbing behavior? Is it workplace violence? Is it something that's having an incivility day? We don't know. You have to understand it and raise the awareness, not only of the fact whether it's happening or not, but what are the consequences? What is the cost? Donna talked about that absolutely in hardcore numbers. What is this behavior costing our organization? What are the risks? Emotional, financial, physical. And then, developing the workplace bullying policy. Here's where it gets good. May include, but not limited to. These are the behaviors. Concrete examples. A lot of people argue about this reasonable person. Well, it depends on how you want to measure reasonableness. A reasonable person would feel that this is bullying. Maybe not. The bottom line is you give examples of bullying in certain contexts, in certain interactions, and in certain environments. And then you have a policy. Because you have the best culture in the world, the best policy in the world, but if you don't actually implement them and how to put them into practice, which means training programs, educational, not one and done. And I always bring this up because I love this. How many people here have been to an anger management workshop or sent somebody to an anger management workshop? Good, because it doesn't work. Why? Because I sit there like, we done yet? Okay, okay, and what is it done? It's didactic, it's cognitive. They're just giving you ideas and information on an intellectual thing to address a what? An emotional component. How's that work? I passed, here's my score, I'm done, and then I go back and start bullying the very next day. They don't work, and there's no feedback. You don't get feedback in terms of whether this behavior is really acceptable. So, training programs ongoing. Improvement overall, culture, morale, and you don't stop at a one-time thing. It's not a one-stop shopping. You have to continually reinforce it, monitor it, interact accordingly. Okay, that's the O. Let's go to group. I'll start at the bottom because I think this is all where we're going. Some people told it, I think Donna called it a, what was it, a compliance, or what was the name of your culture?
Community of kindness.
Community of kindness. Relates to psychological safety. I'm emotionally safe to contradict, to disagree, to voice my opinion without retaliation, without demeaning, and without punishment. So I always start with that because that's the open, honest, and direct communication. Collaborative mindset. Okay, everybody talks about what the problem is, right? We define the problem, we talk about it, we give examples. Okay, you got 50% of the solution. I have a rule when I was in the EAP, in fact I made a t-shirt, that said, when in doubt, go find out. Meaning if you come to me with a complaint and no solution, I'm not hearing you. If you have a complaint, you need at least to come up with possible solution or solutions. Okay? Goes with the idea, collaborative. Now, here's a key one. Most bullies, and I would say this in the medical field more than anything else, they always use the excuse of, well, it's for patient safety. I had a doctor simply say, you killed my patient, to the anesthetist. Okay? Now, according to the organizational culture, there was a screw up and the doctor was completely well within his rights to criticize this person. What they did not realize is when that person was told that you're killing my patient, how was that person's, all you future empathy folks out there, what was that person feeling? Pretty crappy, right? And here's the key question, how did that feeling impact that person's performance to do his or her job in the OR? Got it? So the point here is you really have to foster an idea that, hey, this is a preliminary, this is beta testing. We don't have all the answers. Let's throw it out there. Give me your feedback. Let's brainstorm. Tell me what you got. What do you think? No, I don't like it. You got to have a discourse, a discussion, a collaboration. Don't think that you're going to get it right the first time in the group. Okay? Managing conflict, that's another whole presentation, but the whole idea here is you want to have an environment of psychological safety where people are free to emote with responsibility. Okay? Now, let's go to the I, the individual change. Provide bullying information resources. That's key. What is it in your organization? I mean, what do people think about when they hear the word bullying? Do they know what your organizational stand is on it? Do they understand it? Maybe not. You have a responsibility to provide that. Websites, intranets, stuff that's completely inside, but also talking about examples and things like that. A formal complaint process can be very helpful. Documentation, the time frame for action, what type of investigation, what type of grievance. A lot of times union folks will already have this, which is great, but it has to be standardized to really reduce, if not eliminate, any discrimination. Okay? Policy violations. I love zero tolerance because I don't believe in it. Let me explain. Zero tolerance used to be that you could kick somebody out of school because they brought a plastic knife to cut their cupcakes for their birthday party. It was a weapon. The kid was expelled. Fair? I don't think so. Here's the way I look at zero tolerance. Zero tolerance means we have a zero tolerance for ignoring the problem. Does that make sense? I think that's a whole healthier way of looking at it. Because zero tolerance, the kid's was second grade, I think. His mother made cupcakes. He brought a plastic knife to cut some of the cupcakes for people that wanted halves, and he was expelled. No ifs, ands, or buts. We have a zero policy. Okay, how's that kid going to feel? Anyway, my point is zero tolerance for ignoring the problem. Okay, now, policy violations, they also have to have appeal options. You need to hear both sides. Ideally, some people talk about mediation, some people talk about arbitration, possible. Again, have your policy in place, communicated, recognized, implemented, ideally before you have your first case. Specialized EAP services. I have a soft spot in my heart for EAP services because I think they work in certain circumstances. But I never saw an EAP referral for anger management or bullying work without having a policy or an understanding of what that person has to do to get back into compliance with the policies of the organization. It's not for me to say as a psychologist, it's not for Freud to say, it's not for God to say. It's for the company to tell them what they need to do. And then you can refer for coaching. There are lots of different ways and lots of different studies out there that show coaching can help if it's done in a constructive manner. There are lots of different ways. I'll mention one shortly. This is key. No one-stop shopping. They're not drive-thrus. Constant, vigilant, monitoring, follow-up, awareness. Why? Canary in the coal mine. If it starts to slip, then what happens? Does it have to be another crisis? No. You intervene earlier, and you set that up right from the very beginning. How many people go out on their first date, for people that still date, and a friend of mine did this about 20 years ago, and he said, I always make a second date before we even go out on our first date, because I don't think that's a fair evaluation. Women loved him. They thought it was actually the most incredible thing, because they had a sense of freedom. It was cool. But I mean, my point is, ultimately, you have to understand that you can't get this right the first time. You got to follow through. You got to take care of stuff. You got to keep looking and keep working at it. It's made by inches, not in miles. Okay, we're closing in. Everybody still awake? Coaching advantage. We do organizational coaching. One of the first things we really need to help organizations do is to recognize what's under the tip of the iceberg. How much bullying is really going on and how much is it costing your organization? That is huge. So you're working with executives. I have to tell people, when they look at me like, huh? No, not here. We don't have a problem. Okay? And then you can provide consultation to help people develop their anti-bullying or anti-harassment, just like theirs. Anybody been on the Department of Labor website, for instance, for those HR folks? If you wanted to look for a substance abuse or a workplace violence policy draft or kind of a template, departmentoflabor.org. Pretty soon there should be one for bullying, I'm hoping. Because people need to understand that we are all in this. We contribute. It's a piecemeal beta testing where we start to recognize that anti-bullying policies are not in place right now. But gradually we are going to get there, just as we did with the harassment. Organizational-wide training programs. Not just the bullies, not everybody. Everybody needs to be involved for a number of reasons, but it has to do with organizational culture. The group coaching really has to do with leadership. How do you work with leaders? Everybody says they do leadership programs. There's a guy at Stanford just came out with a book that's leadership training is BS. I haven't read the book yet, but it's fascinating because I think some of it's such a bunch of crap. Because one of the things they do is it's one and done. We go to a retreat, we climb ropes, we have an 8-hour retreat, consultants get paid lots of money, and then they all go off and become the real dweebs that they always were. Okay? So leadership coaching has to be done with a little more thought and in compliance in terms of our strategy, I guess the way it would be. Amy Edmondson, for those of you in HR, I think she is a really important author. She wrote a book called Teaming, as in T-E-A-M-I-N-G. It's a brilliant book. She talks about small group behavior. And what she does is that she talks about communication, conflict. How do you model the types of things to get the maximum benefit and performance out of your groups? Okay? Now, coaching. As a BCC, board certified coach, I have a soft spot in my heart for this. Why? Because I can provide the emotional support and I can be a sounding board for people's issues. How hard is it for an HR person to be continually bombarded with complaint after complaint after complaint? Who are they going to go to? Okay, sometimes a coach can really be helpful. Caveat. See that word conduct? I always point out, this goes back to my question that Antonio brought up. You have a high performer who happens to be a bully. You can and should separate between performance and conduct. Huge difference. Performance, one thing, conduct is another. So remember that. Company policies, got to be in place. Confidentiality, that's a key part. You really have to be respectful because people are not going to talk to you unless they know that it's going to stay in the room. And I think from a therapeutic standpoint, I understand it from the very beginning. I have an ethical obligation. Some people don't have the same licensure issues that I do, so therefore they sometimes, oh yeah, somebody wants to see HR, and they're talking about, remember the time they had that water cooler fight? Well, like, you don't need to have that. Nothing's going to get done. Confidentiality is key. Assessment, intervention, follow-up. Can't have one without the other. You got to do them all. Now, in the original program, I was going to talk about boss whispering, so people probably wonder what that was. It was good because it's a type of coaching that has to do with addressing abrasive managers, leaders, whatever the case would be, but you confront them with the perceptions of the people that have experienced that abrasive behavior. Meaning, you don't get into the he said, she said, you weren't there, how do you know? They actually interview people that have been bullied, abused, have experienced the abrasive behavior, and then you get this, you ask them a kind of a structured, semi-structured assessment to take back to the person who's perpetrating this so that they get a real clue. And what are we talking about here for the emotional intelligence? Empathy. There are so many people that I've worked with, I believe maybe 50% of them when they tell me, I had no idea that's how they saw me. Some of them are absolute BSing me, I know that, and I call them on it. Some people are genuinely, they have no insight. You have to develop a way to get them to see that my behavior is causing you pain, and I have to change my behavior. Okay? That's just one way of looking at it. There's lots of different ways. There's the Boss Whispering Institute. It's run by Laura Crawshaw. Lisa and I were at her seminar. It's in out of Portland, Oregon. Some pretty good stuff. See what you think. And that brings us, how's my time? It's 1:15. Pretty close. Over? Under?
Okay.
Do we have time for any questions, thoughts, comments?
One or two?
Yeah.
Go. Pete.
So, I'm a volunteer firefighter. You said you've worked with fire departments. Have you worked with like organizational issues? Because there's like these big like machismo and like all kinds of fighting inside departments.
Well, it's
you know?
culture. It's a culture, man.
Yeah.
It's exactly the
Do you have any
culture.
like strategies that you've employed that help with that?
Of course. But it's going to cost you and your department. No, but there are. Because, well, see, that's a unique population. You have to know your population because you guys do shifts. First of all, you guys are closer than some of your spouses and families. You do whatever shift you're on, ABC or shift, whatever it is. You're there for how long? How long are you guys there?
Well, I live there, so like I stay overnight.
Yeah, okay. But, I mean, if you're volunteer, that's a little different. But some of the regular firefighters, they're there for 24 off, 24, whatever it is, 2 on. So there's a different way of living there. Now that's, sometimes, we don't look at that necessarily as consulting, we look at that as family therapy.
Okay.
But it is, but there are ways, and it's absolutely one of the things that I just enjoyed. I did a lot of ride-alongs with firefighters. I used to stay overnight. One of my peak experiences, by the way, completely offside, I got to drive the ladder, part of the back, the rear end of the hook and ladder. How cool was that? It's the most disorienting thing because you're going the opposite way. It's bizarre. But anyway, there are things about that.
Okay.
Another question? 2?
Can you speak to how a bully might use zero tolerance as a bullying technique?
How so? As
No.
protection?
No. We have zero tolerance for this, therefore, you're not a good person. Can you just sort of talk around that, like you did that, and we have zero, like, was that person who threw the second grader out for the knife incident being a bully? How might a bully use that to maintain control?
How is the person who threw the person out? Well, at that point, I don't know that that person was anything but in control. It was the principal.
Exactly.
So my point there is, who would be contesting that? Not the second grader.
No.
It would have to be the parents. And what I think ultimately what did happen was eventually they were forced to go back and revisit that policy because it didn't take into key word, just like perceptions, context.
That's the piece, I think.
Context.
Yeah, that's what I was
You really have to be understood what was the real threat there.
Right.
How many people have had their nail clippers confiscated at the airport?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to hold somebody hostage with a nail clipper? You turn this plane around, I'm going to cut your toenail off.
Sure, if you guys can.
Seriously. But I see your point, because I think what you're saying though is, you can't depend on the victim or the person, the target I prefer, because victim implies, whatever, but I like target. You can't depend on each target to kind of be the one to confront it.
Right.
And if the person's saying, well, if you get away with it, well then this is a little unique only because it's so absurd. But I think if you get into a situation where zero tolerance for maybe a lateral bullying where you have equal status and maybe even equal power, then somebody's going to have to say, okay, what are your avenues to stop this behavior? Because see, that's the whole point. I call it working backwards. Where do you want to end up? What's your end game? I want to end up with no more bullying, so I have zero tolerance, which means I want to get here, I have to go back to here to figure out how to get here. So if you have somebody that says zero tolerance, then okay, that means I'm not going to ignore it, which means now you have some responsibilities to follow through on it.
So just real quickly, a quick addition to that, I think it's sort of the same thing. The second grader that was kicked out of the room is not the only target.
Right.
It's the other second graders.
Right.
So now the message has been sent. Just back to the retaliation about organizing, right? It's not Dan living in the van down by the river that's
Right.
the target of bullying.
It's the people still
Everybody
there.
else is still there. And then the second thing is when you talk about the end point of where we want to get to, there's some research that says that the reason that European countries are so much better at handling this is because they take a positive rights approach versus a negative rights approach.
Yes.
So their end to getting there is worker dignity.
Yeah.
That's our goal. And so if it violates worker dignity, it's bullying.
And
If
zero
it
tolerance
doesn't,
for that.
Then it's not.
Exactly.
Exactly. So, but we take this negative rights approach, and that's why we have.
Well, there's two reasons. There's one major reason for that, and I will give you a real quick one on this one. Because whether or not we prefer to have positive reinforcement as a motivator, it has been shown that one negative reinforcement will probably be even more effective across the board. And I'll give you an example. Even now, can you think back to when anybody here was in grade school and they were the target of an insult or a real negative, emotionally disturbing comment?
Yep.
How long ago was that?
Kindergarten.
30 years, 20 years? You never forget it. So it's called one trial learning. I stick my hand on the burner. You think I'm going to do that again? Okay. So my point is, negative reinforcement works. The problem is that that's pretty much all we're depending on, as opposed to maybe trying to get a hybrid where we look, is this our goal? This is what's going wrong now. How do we move to here to ultimately get to here? Okay? And so hopefully, just to kind of end it up, this is what your ultimate objective is. We want success in a lot of different ways. In your organization, your professional success, and the success is ideally the eradication of bullying behavior. And good luck with that, and we're all working towards it. So thank you for your time.